Hello and welcome to our webcast. Moss Adams is pleased that you joined us for today's webcast, How to Create Inclusive Boards and Committees. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief video.
Welcome and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. We have Kinman Tong, partner, and Maria Stroth, Senior Manager here at Moss Adams. Their bios and contact information are located in your console if you would like more information. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Kinman to get the presentation started. Kinman?
Well, good morning or good afternoon to some of you. My name is Kinman Tong. My pronouns are he, his, and I'm a partner in our not-for-profit and public sector industry group, focusing on education and healthcare. I also have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of our firm's Inclusion and Diversity Board as well, that is tasked with directing and leading our firm's goal of becoming an anti-racist firm and furthering our DEI work and impact as well. I'm glad to be sharing some about both our professional experience and also board experience as we kind of cover this inclusive board topic, and I'll hand over to Maria.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so pleased that you are here. My name is Maria Stroth. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior manager on our strategy and operations consulting team, and I specialize in helping organizations improve effectiveness, efficiency, and equity throughout their operations at all levels. And one of the areas that has come up for us lately is the importance of equity and inclusion at the leadership level and at the board level, and how that really sets a tone for your organization. So I'm excited to be here discussing this topic with you today, and I'll pass it back to Kinman to get us started.
All right. Well, as Maria has mentioned, our goal today is to discuss how to create inclusive boards and committees, which is the third of our 5-session series of building better boards. There's 2 previous sessions that's available online, and we have 2 more upcoming sessions after today, including 1 final panel discussion where Maria and I will actually return with a few other active board leadership of foundation and nonprofit to talk about increasing board resilience through DEI work as well. The key takeaway that we want all of you to take away from today's session is to develop an understanding of inclusive governance best practices and kind of helping you navigate your roles and your active participation and leadership on the board, to identify and enhance strategic leadership skills of all of you as you make your decisions and also help each organization they're involved with their governance, and finally, some actionable strategies to kind of make all this happen as well. We'll start off with a polling question on understanding what are the roles that each of you have in the organization that you represent today. And if you have multiple roles, I'll say, pick the one role that is the most relevant in our discussion topic today, and what you're hoping to get from this session for that role. A couple more seconds before we'll close out the poll. Making sure everyone gets their CPE. All right. We have a pretty good mix of board members and management team and staff members. This is great because there's a lot of lessons learned that we'll share that will help each of this role in kind of putting together what we call inclusive board and committees in your organization as well. I'll hand it over to Maria to kind of get us started with the first section of our topic today.
Great, thank you, Kinman. So I wanted to start with just setting some context for what it means to be a diverse, inclusive, and equitable board. So when we're thinking, for this purposes of this presentation, we're largely focused on inclusion and being an inclusive board. But of course, these concepts are interrelated. And in order to be an inclusive board, we also need to be a diverse and equitable board. When we're thinking about a diverse board, we're thinking about a board that is made up of individuals who have differences in different demographics like race, ethnicity, gender, age, etc., but also individuals who have different experiences and backgrounds and who bring different perspectives to the table in our conversations. When we're thinking about an inclusive board, we're thinking about a board that is actively working to create a welcoming and supportive environment for its members. An inclusive board values and respects the perspectives and the contributions of all of its members. And importantly, it has policies and practices that really are in place to ensure equal opportunity to participate and contribute. So really integrating inclusion into the way that we're operating on a daily basis as a team together. When we think about an equitable board, that's taking it a step further and thinking about not just ensuring everyone has a seat at the table, but also ensuring everyone has the resources and support that they need to be able to meaningfully contribute to decision making. So equitable boards are focused on opportunities, fairness in opportunities, and outcomes as well. And they may even be actively seeking to address issues of systemic bias and discrimination that could be occurring, whether that's on the board or in the community that you're serving. We have seen boards and committees that we work with, governing bodies that we work with, experience a lot of benefits from being a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable board. I think a big piece of this is improved decision-making and problem solving. When we have more ideas coming to the table, when we value the perspectives of different people with different experiences, we tend to have stronger decisions that work for more people. Another point I want to point out here is that it can be really helpful to support recruitment and retention efforts. That's a challenge that we've seen with many boards recently, is being able to fill the spots on our board, make sure we're able to recruit members and also retain members. And so having a more inclusive board is one way to help you get there. These are some of the characteristics of an inclusive environment. We're going to talk about many of these ideas throughout today's discussion, but here I wanted to take a moment to really emphasize the importance of collaboration and trust in creating a safe environment so that folks feel like they can contribute meaningfully, like they can be a part of the decision-making that your board or your committee is engaging in. So how do we get there? How do we create an inclusive board? These are the 5 strategies that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about increasing diversity on boards and committees, the importance of building a culture of trust and collaboration, We'll talk about engaging in inclusive meeting practices. So that's sort of some of the tangible stuff that you can do in your meetings. And we'll talk about the education component of developing your board and committee members so that they understand DEI related concepts, and also establishing structure and accountability. And you're going to hear accountability be a key theme throughout this conversation today, because of course, when we measure things, we're sending a signal that it matters. And when we hold people accountable for things, we're more likely to have success. I want to pass it back to Kinman to get us started with the first strategy.
Thank you, Maria. As Maria just covered, our first best practice strategy that we'll be discussing is increasing the diversity on boards and committee. And part of this strategy, of course, is looking at the three core components of what a board composition would have, right? We've kind of talked about, every board is unique and special and different. And a lot of it has to do with there's a sized component that is going to be unique, the experience of the board that is also very unique. And a lot of this is also I'll say the journey of the board in terms of, startup or well established. And also the final component, which we'll be spending a lot more time on, is the diversity of the board. And one thing that I'll note is our colleagues actually have covered a lot about the size and experience of the board in previous session. So definitely would encourage you to dig into those two other webcasts to cover those sections. So we'll dive right into diversity. And in terms of diversity, what we are looking in the spectrum of diversity is the fact that the diversity of the board is critical and important to a board's experience and also the governance of the board. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we want to make sure that the board is well-rounded, not any different than any management team or even your talent workforce. So a lot of the diversity aspect that we look at is definitely around professional background, any subject matter experts that we are looking for on the board, be it financial experts or legal experts or maybe compliance expert. And if there's a special area, such as it's a medical oriented or healthcare oriented board, you want folks who has actually also in the medical fields as well. Demographics, Maria has kind of covered the whole race, age, gender, and other demographic elements. Those are always important to bring diverse experience and expertise, and also, I'd say, life experiences as well. Community representation is pretty important in the not-for-profit, especially in the not-for-profit and public sector space, just to ensure that the community that the nonprofit or government entity that's representing covers all those, especially if you're covering a huge geographical area. You also want to make sure that every community that is being served is represented there. Skills and technology are definitely areas that can be enhanced. And then lastly, that I want to point out is strategic experience, especially if the organization itself is going through certain strategic decisions or life journey of the organization. Strategic experience that would add value to that will be important in terms of bringing those expertise and experiences to the board's discussion and decision making as well. While we are focusing on building a comprehensive board, the focus here is selecting a team, right? Putting together a team that best would advise the management team and help with the decision making on for the organization. So a lot of this isn't focused on let's find that one person. Is how do we put the best team to ensure that they could be the key governance for the organization. And here's an example of a board composition matrix that used with our organization in terms of looking at expertise, attributes, competency, and a lot of other factors that could be helpful. This is a snapshot. There could be a lot more columns depending on what are the criteria or items that you're looking for, and depending on what other metrics that are important. You want to make sure you track this. And you're kind of talking about how important this is to kind of track what you have for the board, and also potentially even gaps that you're looking for in terms of creating an inclusive and diverse board in your recruiting process, which we'll cover as well. How do you get a diverse board composition? Of course, through equitable recruitment. I think we have an audience that actually asked this question earlier about the fact that strategies around recruiting is so important, because part of finding board members, it's recruiting board members. And a lot of this is how do you ensure you have an equitable recruitment strategy or process in place that will ensure that you have good representation. And in part of that process, as I mentioned, the matrix is looking at what are the gaps that you need to that you are finding, and what are the considerations to recruit for those gaps, and then from there engaging candidates and evaluating them so that then you can onboard them as part of your diverse and inclusive board as well. So this is pretty important in kind of the first step. We'll kind of go through a case study that will cover why this is important as well. One of the key factors that's been crucial about board on the onset of recruitment is on the other end, which is succession planning. Building up leaders who are going to be your board officers or committee chairs and whatnot, is how do you consider succession planning to ensure that you have a long-lasting, diverse board that is going to continue to evolve, continue to stay diverse and equitable and inclusive, and continue to create a pipeline of candidates that will help grow the organization and involve with the organization as well. A lot of this is also create space and time, especially for board members who could potentially be burnout or have changes in actually personal lives that would require them to step back or step out. So part of this, how do you create this succession planning so that it's key to the overall board discussion at all time, making sure that you don't have a fall off of a cliff where you certainly are missing a bunch of leadership or experienced folk, and now you have to start from scratch. So a lot of this will create opportunities as well, and then create this long-lasting trust and confidence within the board to ensure sustainability too. As I mentioned, one of the things that we'll kind of cover through today's session is some case study that we have seen in the marketplace, that we have actually had the opportunity to work with organizations in looking at their boards in inclusiveness and diversity as well. So the challenge that we noted with this organization is that the board is experiencing shrinkage due to retirement and departure of longtime board members. Actually, some of them were actually founding board members, and we see it a lot, especially during the days of pandemic and then post-pandemic. There's a lot of burnout due to a lot of the things that everyone had to deal with, especially in certain sector of the nonprofit. But because of that, because of the long standing of a lot of the board members, it became very exclusive. It's very close, and they had a very difficult time recruiting and accepting new board members because they have all known each other for a long time. They're comfortable with how things are going. They're comfortable with a lot of their decisions and their processes. But because of the burnout, they need to find new board members and essentially infuse new energy to the board as well. The board was, in the end, actually decided to bring on an outside consultant to help facilitate some of these recruitment discussions and also strategy, helping them to think outside of the box in terms of how who are the names that they want to recruit, who are friends of the organization that they might want to start tapping in, talking to, and engaging in the process, because ultimately the board has to be comfortable with who they onboard at the end of the recruiting process as well. The outcome was great. The board was re-energized. They had new board members, including some that are what we call on the younger generation, which is part of a new generation that they were trying to onboard to bring new perspective, new ideas. They were also able to leverage the tenured board members to actually coach, mentor, and also provide their experiences, so that the new board members can leverage those as well. And a lot of the institutional knowledge doesn't just get lost. This allows a lot of transitional time. They actually had some of the board members stay on as emeritus board, so that they'll come to certain meetings, participate in certain committee discussions, so that a lot of the institutional knowledge remains with the organization as well. So great outcome for this organization, something to think about. A lot of this definitely requires a lot of gap assessment and review as well. Thinking about the board that each of you are in right now, how inclusive do you think your board is? If you have multiple board, just pick one and use that as a decision making here, or do an average of all the boards that you are involved in. Maria, what do you typically see in terms of how inclusive the boards that the organization's board that you work with nowadays?
Yeah, great question. I think that we're seeing a lot of boards doing a lot of what you just talked about, which is recruiting and trying to create a more diverse board. And where a lot of boards are in their evolution is kind of that next phase. How do we kind of make sure that our boards are inclusive and we're able to sort of bring all of those diverse perspectives to the table?
Yeah, definitely seeing that a lot. All right, this is definitely a bell curve where we definitely see there's actually 7% of you that are not inclusive at all. So hopefully a lot of the lessons that we'll discuss today will add value in terms of how you bring this board back to your board and your leadership in kind of reviewing this. The rest of you, I think the 21%, you'll definitely want to hear some of your best practices because you're doing great and there might be lessons that others can learn as well. I'll turn it over to Maria to kind of cover our second strategy.
Thank you so much, Kinman. I really do love that case study you shared about recruitment. And I really want to build on that and talk a little bit about, okay, now that we have a diverse board, how do we build a culture of trust and collaboration? Part of this is a sort of first step, I guess, toward creating that culture of trust and collaboration and an inclusive environment is developing a shared commitment to DEI. So thinking as a group, coming together and really agreeing on the benefits of change and the risks of inaction. There are some different ways that you can start to affirm DEI as a key value of your organization. And these are some best practice examples. One of them is reviewing and updating your organization's mission statement and value statement. So you might be coming into a governing body, whether a board or committee, for an organization that already has a mission and value statement, and that's great. This is an opportunity for you to work together to revisit those statements and make sure they reflect DEI as a commitment for your organization. Or you might be coming into a situation where there isn't a mission or value statement. And this is a really great value add that you can bring to your organization and to your board, both generally in terms of setting some vision and direction for the board, but also in terms of, again, emphasizing that commitment to DEI. You can also take that a step further and develop a specific DEI statement that really specifically addresses your organization's commitment to DEI. I think that for organizations that have already have strong mission and value statements that incorporate DEI, and they're already doing some things to operationalize DEI within their board or governing group, this may not be as critical or necessary. But for a board that is just getting started, for a board that is really trying to establish that initial commitment to DEI, create alignment among your group, developing a specific DEI statement can be a really helpful best practice for you to think about. And then the other two ideas here are really taking that a step further. So once we've set that foundational commitment and we've agreed to focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to start to incorporate DEI into our ongoing discussions. So that might look like having DEI be a regular topic of discussion, maybe at every board meeting, or maybe on a regular cadence every few board meetings, depending on what you're looking for there. It may also look like establishing DEI metrics and benchmarks to measure progress toward reaching DEI goals. So whether that's looking at your recruitment and setting some metrics in terms of how diverse your board is, thinking about retention and diversity metrics there, whatever might be most important for your board at this point in time. Again, when we measure things, we're sending a signal that it matters. And when something matters, when we send a signal that something matters in an organization or on a team or a group working together, we're more likely to be successful in creating change. So I really want to highlight that importance of establishing metrics and really holding ourselves accountable to creating change in that way. The other thing you can do is create a code of conduct. It seems like a simple activity, a simple thing, but a code of conduct I have seen be incredibly helpful for increasing alignment on boards and creating a more respectful culture of trust and collaboration. A code of conduct, as I'm sure many of you know, is a set of rules and guidelines, and it is really there to outline expectations for behavior, outline how interactions should occur. and set expectations for those interactions. And importantly, a code of conduct can also set standards for how we address a violation to our standards and our expectations for each other when we're working together. So a code of conduct, typically we're going to see it include these elements on the slide, and we definitely want to make sure that there's a process for review and revision to your code of conduct. And again, I just want to emphasize that this is a really important tool to create an inclusive environment. In boards that I've been on myself, creating a code of conduct, sometimes there's a little bit of resistance to it. But if we can really get together and pull that together, it can really help us work together more effectively. Building a culture of trust and collaboration also requires us to think about access. We're going to talk a little bit more about access and accessibility in some later slides. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that when you have an intentional and thoughtful commitment to access as a board, and you're setting those clear expectations around making sure that everyone has equal opportunity to participate, that lends itself to a more trusting environment among board members. So people start to trust each other more. That can encourage more diverse perspectives and really start to advance your ability to make effective decisions. Okay, these next few slides I'm really excited about. We're going to talk a little bit about designing human-centered conversations and creating psychological safety. These are two really important components of creating an inclusive environment. Again, when we're thinking about an inclusive environment on a board or a committee, we're thinking about an environment that fosters dialogue, that prioritizes different perspectives and different experiences. And I would say that when we're designing human-centered conversations, we want to make sure we're not only welcoming diverse perspectives, but that we're seeking diverse perspectives. And so that means that there's a bit of proactivity that's required there, right? Some advanced planning, some advanced preparation to make sure that we're designing conversations that really invite people in and get people dialoguing together. So I was recently working with a board earlier this year, and one of the things they were finding difficult to do was to encourage participation from all of their board members. We've all seen this before, right? It's the same board members driving the conversations time and time again, and there's not really a lot of space for other people to contribute and participate. So this board, in addition to implementing some of the strategies we already discussed, implementing a code of conduct, thinking about shared values, they also started to implement some really structured decision-making tools to create more active participation. So I wanted to provide a couple of examples of what that can look like. So we can do sort of traditional brainstorming where we bring everyone together and we have a dialogue where everyone sort of is able to contribute. We can also have a brainstorming method where we give people the space to brainstorm individually on their own first, and then bring those ideas together in a round robin style. Or maybe we use breakout rooms with using technology so that people can have smaller group discussions. Maybe that's a way that they feel more comfortable engaging, and then they're able to bring those ideas to the group. Another strategy I've seen be really effective is to start to think about if there are opportunities to break up conversations into multiple conversations, especially when we're talking about complex ideas like developing a new strategy for an organization as the board. And so maybe you want to have a conversation that's really focused on just diverging. So really focused on, let's create all of the ideas and get all of the ideas on the table first. And let's not focus on whether this is the right idea or not. Let's just get all the ideas out there, because that starts to encourage people to feel safe and comfortable with bringing ideas to the table. Then you let people step away, have some time to think about that conversation, and you bring them back together to do that convergence process where you're building consensus and you're narrowing down the ideas and the opportunities in terms of next steps and how to move forward. So these types of methods, we're really thinking about how people engage in conversations and really bringing them in a little bit more to the conversation. They allow you to co-create solutions. And I just love that word when I think about human-centered conversations, because when I think about co-creation, it really makes me feel like everyone was included in that decision and we came to it together, which is, again, more effective decision-making. The last element here I wanted to discuss is psychological safety, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this idea. I wanted to share the definition from Amy Edmondson, who is the researcher who coined this phrase. So she says psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And psychological safety is really important for the strategies we've discussed today and overall for creating an inclusive environment. I would say that if you're on a governing group, whether it's a board or committee, one simple thing you could do right now is have your members trained on creating a psychologically safe environment, and that would be a simple activity to increase inclusiveness on your team. There are 4 stages of psychological safety that group members may feel. So this ranges from inclusion safety, which is really about feeling like we can interact without the fear of rejection, embarrassment, or punishment in those interactions, all the way up to level 4, which is challenger safety. And this is where we feel comfortable to disagree with the group when we think a change is needed. And challenger safety is the highest level of psychological safety because it requires some vulnerability, right? There's a level of personal risk when we're disagreeing with what the group is saying or what kind of sort of challenging the status quo. So we really want to try to move our board or our committee through this process to that challenger safety so that we have a group that feels comfortable disagreeing. There are lots of different ways we can get there. We don't have time to get into all of those today. We could do a whole presentation on psychological safety, but I wanted to give you this conceptual framework so you can really start to think about how it might apply to the groups that you are a part of. Bringing all of this together, that was a lot of content, a quick case study. So earlier this year, I was working with a small nonprofit board. They had some longtime board members and some newer board members. And the board had challenges with communication and collaboration. And a lot of this was related to the communication styles of the more tenured board members and the less tenured board members. So this was leading to some frustration and some tension on the board. And in fact, a new board member just left. Didn't even stay on the board because it was too challenging to be a part of it, and they didn't feel like they could add value. So some of the things that we did with the board, we had a work session with the board to establish shared values, to establish a shared commitment. We worked with them to develop a code of conduct that everyone could agree to abide by. And again, agreeing to abide by the code of conduct was a really powerful move that this board took to get everyone aligned and on the same page. We also provided board members with training on inclusive leadership and psychological safety. And the outcomes of these solutions is that the board now has a stronger relationship. Of course, it's still a work in progress. We can't change these things overnight, but they are experiencing more effective decision-making and increased engagement in board activities and discussions. Okay, the next section I wanted to talk about is engaging in inclusive meeting practices. These are some of the barriers to inclusive meetings that we see. I think one of the biggest is the power dynamics. That's one that we commonly see, and some of the strategies we've already talked about today, as well as the strategies in this section, will help us work through that. Effective meeting logistics are a piece of this, and these are sort of simple things, right? These are things that represent effective meetings in general, but also help us create a more inclusive environment. I think a couple of the highlights I wanted to point out here is the importance of creating clarity around what people's roles are, what people's expectations are, giving people advance notice of what we're going to be discussing in a conversation through a clearly outlined agenda and setting clear objectives. A lot of times what I see is agendas that will say things like budget, goals, updates. Okay, I don't really know what we're going to be discussing with that sort of an agenda. So I really encourage you to think about having a detailed agenda that really makes it clear we're going to be discussing the proposed budget and making decisions on any changes that are needed. Really be clear about what that conversation is going to be about to help people come to the conversation in a way that they're able to be more prepared to engage in the discussion. Meeting agreements are a really great way to create and support inclusive meetings. These are ground rules that set standards for respectful communication. This slide has some example meeting agreements that we've commonly seen. But I would encourage you, if you don't already have meeting agreements, to work with your group to come up with these together. You could do this at the first meeting of your group each year, and then revisit it every year, or revisit it when you have significant membership turnover. And then the other thing I would encourage is to take a look at these at the beginning of every meeting, just to make sure that folks remember them and that they're staying top of mind. Because I know for me, that's really helpful. When I see the meeting agreements in the beginning of the board meetings that I'm a part of, it reminds me, hey, I'm not supposed to be multitasking. I'm going to close my email. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk today. So it just is a nice reminder for people to really become present in the space that they're in. Hybrid meetings, they're really great to increase inclusivity from the perspective of making sure people can participate, whether in person or virtually. But they do require a lot of preparation in advance to be successful. A lot of times what I see is there's a small laptop in the front of the room and all the virtual participants are there and no one can see them. They can't see the group. No one can hear each other. So they're just sort of observers of the conversation rather than actively engaged. So you want to be thinking about some of the strategies on this slide to make sure that you're really inviting people into a shared conversation when you're having hybrid meetings. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but I just wanted to emphasize that communication, effective communication, is really critical to creating an inclusive environment. So thinking about things like being concise, giving other people space to speak, using visuals, using different types of communication, all of these things will increase engagement and inclusion on your board or committee. And then addressing accessibility, one of the key themes I've heard from individuals who are differently abled in the communities that I work with is there's often little room to really think about what accommodations are needed because there's such a pressure to be efficient. And there's such a pressure to kind of just like get things done and move on. And sometimes we don't hold the space that we need to. So I really just wanted to say this highlights the importance of us moving beyond just making our board diverse, but also taking action to ensure accessibility. And so that might look like having an audit of accessibility, doing a review, understanding where you have opportunities to improve accessibility, providing translation services for individuals who are English language learners, or providing training on how to communicate effectively with people from different cultures. So bringing all of this together, I wanted to highlight this case study before I pass it over to Kinman again. I was working with a medium-sized foundation recently, and this board had engaged in a really concentrated effort to recruit more diverse members. And so that it was successful, that was a win worth celebrating. But they lacked the tools to be able to provide equal opportunity to their diverse members. And this was leading to some disengagement and actually having unintended consequences. So they did a needs assessment. They identified the specific needs of their members. They provided training to their members on communication, especially communicating across cultures. They were able to get some low-cost solutions to translation services and also were able to engage with community partners who are able to support them in increasing inclusion as well. So this was a way they were able to improve inclusion on their board, and it was really successful for them. And I am going to pass it back over to Kinman to talk about the education component of this.
Thank you, Maria. So as we kind of talk about the fact that the developing our board members is critical in kind of ensuring that the board stays inclusive and diverse as well, because part of the development of the board is that they learn something and they grow with the organization and be able to kind of continue to add value in those sense as well. So we'll kind of cover what it means to be what we call inclusive leaders. And a lot of this has to be the fact that they are not only diverse themselves, but the fact that they are also consistently foster belonging and authenticity as leaders in the organization, kind of role modeling and whatnot for the organization to continue to stay aligned as well. Some of the key traits of an inclusive leaders that we want to kind of talk about is the fact that they have visible commitment to inclusion and diversity, making it a personal priority. They are humble. A lot of this creates space for contribution. I think Maria kind of talked about some of these humilities are important in the meeting environment and the discussion and brainstorming. so that you don't have this one person that dominates the whole discussion or decision making as well. Awareness of blind spots or biases is very critical, just because it creates awareness, it creates a humility as well, and be able to kind of work through any biases that might have come across in the discussion as well. Curiosity, what I would say is willing to learn about new stuff, willing to kind of explore a new paradigm or new discussion item or new perspectives is critical, because part of it is also the next item, which is cultural intelligence on adaptation, being able to learn and grow and be able to work through the various cultural competencies as well. And then all this kind of comes together to kind of go back to collaboration. Collaboration is so important because it's about empowering others. It's the fact that you are helping everyone to rise together versus trying to put somebody down so that your voice is louder as well. And part of the inclusive leadership traits that we kind of talk about here is a lot of it has to do with the fact that we want to make sure that the board continues to grow and evolve. Right, and a lot of the traits there are things that can be expedited by creating a lot of this opportunity to develop, opportunity to develop themselves for the betterment of the organization. And a lot of the ongoing education topic that have come up in a lot of the boards that I've been on and that we have worked with, a lot of it has to do with just cultural competency, understanding that, especially if there's a certain segment of the population, or I'll call, market-facing opportunity, that you can learn that as well. Learning about fiduciary responsibility and risk management is critical, especially given the fact that we have weathered through pandemic. And a lot of that's just understanding risks, what are the exposures, and also how can we remain fiduciarily responsible and accountable as well. ESG is a hot topic in all areas, and part of this is continual focus on stakeholders in all three areas of this, and DEI kind of falls right into the whole social aspects of that. So it makes sense to understand the environmental impact and the governance impact. Again, as board, governance is critical and important as well. So great topics to dig into if you're looking for opportunities to enhance the board's education and awareness of relevant topics. Another area that we've kind of talked about earlier in kind of recruiting new members is how do you then onboard them? How do you ensure that you set them up for success from the get-go versus trying to let them learn on the fly or learn as they kind of grow into their role? But a lot of this is how do you onboard them by ensuring that they have good institutional knowledge of the organization. So a lot of history, a lot of bylaws, a lot of strategic plan, even financial statements, so that they understand that, the revenue streams and whatnot of the organization. Educating them on the budget process, because fiduciary responsibility is so critical to their process. And then the other aspects of it is the whole org chart, roles, responsibility. How do you create expectation? Just to make sure that they know what they are walking into, what they're committing to, and how that they are expected to function as a board member as well. Board buddies is very helpful, as I know when I was a new board member, actually the treasurer was my board buddy, and he was very helpful in kind of getting me up to speed on a lot of the decisions and a lot of big projects that was happening in the organization, so that I can cut up to speed. Long story short, I'm now the new treasurer as well, so part of this is also training your successor in that process, which is also important as well, and part of that is thinking through the committee assignment and succession planning in that area as well. We want your perspective on, what training would you think will be helpful to your board right now in terms of the area that we just covered, in terms of either good governance, cultural competencies, role and responsibility, or even inclusive leadership, of course, the catch-all, all of the above. We just want to remind everyone that you do need to get essentially 3 polling questions to qualify for CPE. For those who are looking for CPE, just making sure that you are answering them, because after this, we have 1 more polling questions left. And then if you have questions, feel free to leave submit the questions through the Q&A window. We'll be glad to kind of get to it at the end of the presentation, or we will definitely follow up with you after the session as well. I think we are waiting on a couple more of you to answer the poll. I think we can close it out. Great smattering of all of it, so definitely would be interested to kind of see how all of you take this away to kind of make sure that you have a lot of this training kind of be part of it. And of course, all of the above is always helpful, and a lot of this can be definitely be fused together for some session as well. All right, I'll cover a final best practice strategy on the inclusive board, which I think both Maria and I have covered some elements of this in our previous sections as well. And a lot of this is how do we establish the structure and accountability. And we've kind of talked about how important accountability is to ensure the longevity and success of the board, which then feeds into the success of the organization as well. The 4 key areas that we are going to cover in terms of the structure and the structure itself, or what we call good governance structure. And then from there, it kind of feeds into how do you then make sure that you have good accountability for the board to ensure the successful board governance as well for the organization. So the first one that we'll cover is roles and responsibility. We in the earlier session, we had a discussion in regards to the fact that having roles and responsibility clearly communicated, especially for both on the board and the committees, to each of the onboarded individuals, making sure that they understand what their roles are, how to contribute, and then how can they then be accountable themselves in their contribution. Part of it is also helping them understand, what are the opportunities to participate, also leadership opportunities in some of these areas as well. These are all areas that always can be fine-tuned and refined as the organization evolves and grows. I always say, if your roles and responsibility hasn't evolved in the last 3 to 5 years, that's questionable. Definitely things to look at, right? And then things to kind of train and enhance as time goes by, because organization change, roles and responsibility has to evolve because of that as well. I'm an auditor at heart, so a lot of what we look at is policy and procedures. And a lot of this is making sure that you have good policies and procedures for the board to operate, right? And Maria kind of talked about the agenda setting is one of the key areas. So a lot of this policy and procedures help guide the decision-making process, but also creates what we call norms and I'll call steps that the board will take to ensure that they know what they're going to do, know what they're required to do, and also know how to do them as well. This will create stability as well, because it's not rules changing every board meeting, rules changing every year, depending on who is the chair of the board or chair of the committee. So this kind of creates a consistent expectation on how they all operate. A lot of the policy and procedures can be around meetings, on decision making, on voting, and also even some of the budgeting processes and review process as well. And we kind of talk about how policy and procedure will also feed into the ultimate goal of good governance, which is good accountability as well. And a lot of people definitely helps make them both implicit and explicitly important for the organization to then work alignment with the board as well. Because a lot of time, you always want to make sure that the board aligns with management team as well, so that you don't have two separate runs against each other, and policy and procedure ensures consistency there as well. Some of the areas that we definitely encourage all of you to look at to ensure that if there is elements of inclusion that needs to be reviewed or reviewed through the inclusion lens, these are the areas that I'll say look at the heart of the teams. So code of conduct, anti-harassment, discrimination prevention, whistleblower retaliation policies, of course DEI policies, and then a lot of the board recruitment, leadership recruitment compensation, committee assignment and decision-making policy. And of course, compensation policy is always critical, just to make sure that a lot of the elements of inclusivity is reviewed, or equitable discussion is being looked at for all these areas as well. talking about just the good governance is then how do we make sure accountability comes out on the other side, and a lot of this is making sure that you put forth good metrics, good benchmarking that you want to meet. A lot of organization calls them OKR, KPI, AOP. There's a lot of different ways to call it or approaches and models, but a lot of the elements is the 5 elements, right? And it's a circularly and continual process of improvement. There's no start and end point, but a lot of it is setting goals. How do you track the goals? How do you assign the goals and responsibility? How do you review and assess? And then how do you improve or enhance from it? So this is a circular process that every one of the process of OKR, KPI, AOP uses. And we always recommend folks to just, use the best approach that makes sense for the organization to leverage from that, because we are not prescribing a format. A lot of this to just make sure that you have consistency in how you do this. And a lot of the process the organization might use for internal function, for leadership or department could be leveraged for the board as well. So is my way to say, don't create something new for the board if you already have something in place for the organization itself. And then the regular assessment and self-evaluation is important. Every board that I've been part of does perform self-evaluation. So a lot of self-evaluation, self-reflecting on how you as a board member perform, how the committee has performed, how the board has performed. A lot of time it's done on an annual basis, just so that you can assess how has the board alignment on that, how has the culture and evolution of that. And also part of it is just assessing, if there's any goal setting that you have, including DEI goals, making sure you're evaluating and review to that. A lot of the board recruiting process and recruitment and also I'll call leadership development process could be monitored in this way as well. Because part of it is just continue to evolve and grow. And if you ever need external consultants, just like Maria and myself, are available to help to either lead the discussion or setting this up to ensure that you're successful as well. Our last polling question before we kind of opening up to everyone for questions is, which areas from our presentation today do you want to work on the most for your organization? And so is it increasing diversity of the board? Is it creating a culture of trust and collaboration? Is it engaging in inclusive meeting practices? Or developing the education aspects of it? Or finally, the structure, the policy, the procedures, the roles and responsibility, and of course the accountability aspects of this. It's one of those things I'm sure all of you wish there was all of the above, because then you make sure you cover them all, but we want you to pick one that you want to work on the most after today's session. And this is our last polling question. So hopefully those who need CPE, you kind of get your answers in so that we captured your CPE edit as well. So I definitely think, on my end, one of those areas that has been helpful in this discussion that's something that I'm going to try to do more is inclusive meeting practices, because I think we can always do more and better, especially the elements of hybrid meetings is the toughest. I actually prefer all in person or all virtual. The hybrid meeting is always, you're either losing people online because everyone in the room is talking to themselves and ignoring the online audience, or the online folks is kind of always asking questions because they cannot hear, they have to get clarification. It's just very, very hard. I think the hybrid meetings is the most difficult element of inclusive meeting to make happen. Well, pretty spread out, which is great. Glad that we have kind of shared, these 5 strategies that all of you can bring forth and work with your organization to enhance the inclusivity of your board. All right, we are going to pass on to Maria to kind of cover questions from the audience.
Great, thank you, Kinman. One of the questions that came in is about what metrics boards can use to measure progress toward DEI goals. And I wanted to share a recent experience I had in that area. And then Kinman, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear that as well. So on a board, I serve on a national board committee, a DEI board committee. And for us, some of the metrics we put into place, we really started small with just trying to understand what was the sort of makeup of the boards and committees that we had. So we started with that diversity metric. And then as we moved along, we realized that people were feeling like we weren't getting diverse members into leadership roles on committees and on the board. So we really expanded into really trying to understand and measure the diversity at the leadership level. And then we started doing sort of a pulse survey of membership to understand how inclusive were we being in terms of the meetings we were having and the activities that we were engaging in as boards and committees. So with those metrics, we're able to better now understand inclusion and diversity on the board, and that has been really helpful. Kinman, what have you seen in this area?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area where I think in order to set KPI, or I'll say goals objective that is relevant and appropriate, ultimately the board has to kind of determine what is the ultimate mission and vision that you're trying to get to, right? So a lot of them can be one of the areas that we have done on one of the boards is kind of looking at the fact that we are membership based. So a lot of it is how do we diversify the membership audience in the, I'll call generational diversity, and kind of tracking them and measuring them and making sure that if there is objectives that the board is doing or leadership is doing, it gets ties into that so that then you can kind of point to what are the action that is working or not working. And then from there, we can then monitor. Right. So I think that has been helpful, is actually tying all those together versus just setting goals and then everyone run and do their own activity and not tying back to the goals or objective. That has been helpful because it's more accountable discussion and whatnot. So.
Yeah, great points. There's a great question I'm curious your thoughts on, Kinman. Someone asks, how do you promote DEI on boards when you have members who are very resistant to DEI work?
Great question. We definitely are aware that, that not everyone is on the same, I would say, the DEI journey. And so part of it and how I work to promote it is helping everyone understand what diversity and inclusion mean. And ultimately, I think there's a lot of perspective that folks have that is like, this is what it means, and a lot of sensational media discussion about it. But ultimately, we want to make sure that we do the best work for the most people to feel the most inclusive and belonging in the organization. And that means every single board members, right? And it's creating the accommodation for that one person to feel more comfortable to be at a meeting. Because ultimately, and I'll give you an example. One of our board members on one of our organizations is hard of hearing. So part of the AI technology that have made virtual meeting more impactful for her is actually the fact that transcription, she can actually read that. She doesn't have to strain her ear to try to listen to it. That's all what we're trying to do, is making it sure that it's accessible and inclusive for everyone. So that's how I promote it, make it the granular level where they go, oh, I get it. You're just making sure that I feel that I have a voice and I can speak to it. And if, folks who do not want that, that's a whole different story. That the resistance is more than just the work itself. It's actually more. I think it's more preferences as individuals might have, a perspective of what DEI means as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. There's this really great model from some researchers in the University of Colorado that makes me think of, and it's about how to measure equity. But I think the way that they break down equity into sort of 4 components, they talk about it's about access, right? They talk about it's about making sure everyone has equal opportunity, making sure we have procedural fairness, and making sure that outcomes are equal across different groups. And I think when we break diversity, equity, inclusion down into those components, most people want things to be fair. Most people want everyone in the conversation to be included. So I totally agree. That's a really great way. I want to pass it back to Danielle to close us out.
Thank you, Maria and Kinman, for a great presentation today. And to our audience, if you do have any further questions or comments, please reach out to us as we'd be happy to continue the conversation. You can drop a note in the Q&A window or reach out to Kinman or Maria directly. Their contact information is in your console. Also, I would like to draw your attention to the image in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click this to be taken to more information on our board governance series, and be sure to register for the next webcast, Create Effective Finance, Investment, and Audit Committees, which will be October 1st. Hopefully you can join us for that one as well. If you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE Progress window. A copy will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have any difficulty downloading it now. And finally, here's a link to an online survey for today's presentation. Thank you for joining our webcast. We hope you'll join us again next time. Thanks, everyone.